All right, let's get into this. I've been kind of waiting for this conversation since the weekend, Frank, and there's some conflicting stuff out there. You know, you got the national horses, you know, the Jim Bowdens, the Ken Rosenthal's, who are really good at their job, both suggesting, hey, the Phillies needed to make the playoffs for Matt Klentak to make it, and even if they made the playoff, they might have had to make a deeper run. That was suggested over the weekend. Bob Brookover, veteran writer, covered the Phillies for basically since I was a kid. He's been around that team. He said, talk to a team source, not happening. What side are you leaning on?
Well, I believe Bob Brookover probably did talk to somebody at the Phillies who believes that. Maybe President Andy McPhail doesn't want to relieve Matt Klentak of his duties. But if you ask me, the Phillies have spent 5.5 years on this rebuild. They had a payroll that probably, now we don't know the total numbers yet, but probably went over the luxury tax. And there's some ramifications that are going to happen going forward. And let's face it, this is a year in which the Phillies, at least as reports have told us, are set to lose over $100 million this year. And they're not going to get any playoff revenue out of that. So all of that combined, I tend to think that all signs point to needing to make a change. And really what's going to happen, whether someone in the Phillies organization says it's not likely there's a change or not, there's only one man who is really going to make that call, and that is CEO John Middleton. And let's face it, last year, after, how long did it take? A week, 10 days of deliberating, he decided to let Gabe Kapler go. Will he do the same type of deliberation and then make a change? That remains to be seen. And he's the guy that writes the checks. He's the guy that has the overall final say on all matters. And if John Middleton wants to change, he's going to make a change.
Last year, there was a lot of pressure to get rid of Kapler. There was some buzz that they didn't really want to get rid of Kapler, but ultimately Middleton did step in and make that decision. How much do you think? Now, there was a report from The Athletic, from Matt Gill, that people inside the organization are being told they're going to lose their jobs, they're going to get laid off, and how much is the COVID-19 and the losses that you mentioned a factor in this decision in your mind? In other words, if this is a normal year and they just don't make the playoffs, is this not even a discussion?
Now, I saw on NBC Sports Philadelphia, there's the one thing that I possibly could see making a difference, and that is that if you let a general manager go and you need to bring in somebody else to replace him, perhaps one of the bigger names that might be available, that is a multi-million-dollar signing of this general manager. And right now, if you're going to be letting all these people go, maybe can you justify letting a bunch of people go to replace this one position? Because $5 million, let's face it, how many employees is that over the great scheme of the entire organization? So if he feels that this would be more just to keep more people around and not have to replace that position with a very expensive replacement when you're already paying Matt Klentak for 2 more years, that's the only way that I could see this being affected. Because, this is still a results-oriented business. And, pandemic or no pandemic, the bullpen that I saw in March was still the bullpen that opened in July or whenever they actually start. What was it? Probably August almost. I don't even remember when this started. It feels like it was last week. But you get my point, right? The bullpen that was constructed last offseason, and that clearly was the critical flaw that kept the Phillies out of the playoff. And it was a flaw that even before the trade deadline we said was gross negligence, and the people he brought in did not do the job. And when results don't happen, generally you lose your job.
Frank, obviously, if you're looking around, you want to save money, you could say, hey, I think our everyday lineup now, we got more on that in just a minute, but we think our everyday lineup's okay. We have 3 pitchers in the rotation that we like. I'm going to give you this season, fix this pitching staff, and that's it. I mean, is that an ultimatum that you can realistically see happening?
The thing about the Kapler firing was Middleton said he took into account the fans because the fans are their paying customers. And last year, Middleton even said when he would ask people or talk to fans about about the status of the manager. He said he heard a number of positive responses about Kapler, as well as a lot of negative responses. I can't find you anybody that really has a positive outlook on Matt Klentak right now, or Andy McPhail, because let's face it, the fans have sat through losing baseball year after year after year after year. And if you look at that final game, Aaron Nola, of course, was a draft pick under Ruben Amaro. He brings into relief him Hector Neris, who was a draft pick, or a signing of Ruben Amaro. And then he ends up giving the ball to Zach Eflin, who was somebody that Ruben Amaro traded for, right? So they have nothing to show for this rebuild, and that's a really sad thing. Bryce Harper was somebody that John Middleton stepped in and made sure the Phillies got, right? So what can you show for the last 5.5 years? And all the fans know is that the Phillies have not done better than 500 any of these seasons dating back to 2011. And Ruben Amaro lost his job in the middle of 2015. Since then, there has been absolutely nothing of note for the fans. And they understand now because Kapler's gone. They brought in a world-class manager in Joe Girardi. For the most part, the fans understand that this was a matter of how the roster was constructed, not a matter of the tactical decisions of Joe Girardi, who had to decide whether he goes with Deolis, Guerra, or Kelly in critical innings in the back end of a game early this season. So if the fans really do have an influence on Middleton like they did last year, I would say that there's not going to be many Matt Klentak fans out there.
No, I don't. I got to be honest with you. I think if you put that stadium filled to capacity and walked around and asked every single person, do you want Matt Klentak back? I don't know that you'd get one yes. I don't know that you would get one yes, but let me ask you this. How important of a role in your mind is the JT Realmuto thing and what he had to say about that whole situation? Wouldn't you think that the owner would listen to that and kind of say, I don't know if JT is going to come back with, you know what I mean? Like, how important is his role in bringing JT back here?
I still kind of stand by what I said a little while ago, which was I think from the start, JT Realmuto and his agent were always going to go to free agency. I noticed Ruben Amaro on NBC Sports Philly in the post game after the final game. He said kind of the same thing, that this agent seems like he's hell-bent on going to free agency. So I don't know that there's anything that the current general manager could have done to make things different. Now, the real question that would become, upon the time that he acquired JT Realmuto, did he read the situation wrong? This agent who kept going to arbitration, he went to arbitration twice out of 3 years with the Marlins, and 2 years out of the 3 demanded a trade, essentially. The Marlins no the first time, and then the Marlins ultimately said yes. And what was the reason to demand the trade? Well, it was probably because they were hoping they would trade him to an organization with deeper pockets and maybe would pay better down the line. So I think that the Realmuto and his agent, it's kind of clear what they're planning to do, which is go get the most money, go get the most years, and that was always the plan. And I don't know that Klentak could have done anything about that except not wait for him in the first place. So then that's what's going to have to be what you look at when you assess the trade. Was 6 years of Sixto Sanchez worth 2 years of JT Realmuto, especially when you weren't able to round out the roster and get it done in those 2 years? I would view the situation differently. If Realmuto came here and the Phillies won a World Series, I don't think you care if he walks, right? Like, let me look at the Washington Nationals. They won the World Series last year, and Anthony Rendon just was left to go away, and they had no more offense. So they can get away with that because they just won a World Series. Phillies didn't win squat. In fact, they couldn't even get together a winning record in the 2 years that you took here. So that really makes you wonder why you would go that far in without doing all it takes to get the rest of the way. And to me, that is what is the indictment of Klentak, not so much whether or not he gets to the end of a contract with Realmuto.
Frank, let me ask you this. Didi Gregorius then, shortstop, had a very good year. I was highly impressed with, just a professional hitter. The fielding, he's good. He's not great, but clutch, big moments. I feel like he's just a solid guy. Certainly wouldn't mind bringing him back. What's the Phillies' thoughts and plans with Didi?
I haven't heard anything yet of what their thoughts or plans are. Honestly, this could be something that depends on the rest of the roster construction. I certainly agree with you. I mean, Didi Gregorius is a true professional. Of all those people in the lineup, you always felt that if he was coming up to bat, there's a chance. Seemed to be very, very clutch. I think that's someone they absolutely need. And when I talk about roster construction, if the Phillies ended up re-signing JT Realmuto and not Didi Gregorius, you might be more okay with that than the other way around, I think. So, but again, a lot depends on that deal before you decide, is it really worth giving him the kind of money he's going to demand? Now, if Didi was a $14 million player this year, I would think you need to at least pay him annually what a qualifying offer number would be, which was the season was about $18 million a year. Can the Phillies afford that? That's a real question right now, because the Phillies have maxed themselves out in so many areas. They need to put together an entire bullpen. They need to find at least one starter, preferably two. That's a lot to fill, and that's even before you address catcher, shortstop. So this is going to be a really critical offseason for whoever's general manager, because they're running out of money. And
right.
The reason why they're running out of money is because the years where they thought, okay, well, we'll throw some money at Carlos Santana, and then we're going to take that $20 million contract, which would have expired after this year, by the way, and then all of a sudden it becomes two players and $30 million, and Gene Segura and Andrew McCutchen, both of whom are very nice players, but they are overpaid for what they do. So they're going to be kind of boxed in here, I think.
I guess you could go back to Segura and play shortstop, have him play shortstop. You can go Alec Boehm. I want to ask you about Rhys Hoskins, though. Is he a guy that you can try to trade to add a couple of arms, an arm, something? I mean, would you say, look, he's just not in our plans. We're going to use Boehm at first base. He's a guy that has some value around the league. Is he the most tradable guy they have?
Actually, yes, if you ask it that way. The Phillies do have other options. I mean, a lot of people don't believe that long-term Boehm is the fit at third base. I think they can get by with Boehm at third base for a season if they need to. I mean, that might be a matter of depends how this thing plays out. I mean, one problem with trading Hoskins, though, is that he is one of your lower-paid players that ideally will produce for you. Now, we'll have to see what happens. Can you trade a guy that might need Tommy John surgery? And even though it's not his throwing arm and he's a position player, not a catcher or a pitcher, might that give another team pause enough that his trade value is diminished? I think that's going to be the big question here. So this injury is something which is concerning, and it might diminish his trade value. But, in terms of the whole concept, I think the Phillies do need to make some sort of uncomfortable trades, as Jim Bowden liked to call them. The one who's reporting on a lot of this about the GM. But the uncomfortable trades, meaning you might have to trade a fan favorite in order to get this roster right. And, if you lose out on Realmuto and you have to find some other way to get creative to get the pieces you need, well, you have to be open-minded. You can't be too attached to your players, even though you very much like them and your fans very much like them. I mean, other than Alec Boehm, it's kind of hard to say who's really the untouchable now at this point on the roster.
Yeah.
So
and to take that a step further, I mean, you were 0-6 in Nola and Wheeler's last 6 starts. I mean, both of those guys. I mean, Wheeler was good. I'm not saying that he was a bust this year, but the last 3 starts was okay. Nola was a problem. You almost have to wonder if you need to find someone to bounce ahead of those two.
Yeah, I think there are perhaps some real questions about Nola when the going gets tough. You look down the stretch the last couple of years. I mean, Nola wasn't Nola at his peak. If Nola is peak Aaron Nola down the stretch, remember 2018 even, he was up for the Cy Young, and he kind of fell off the rails in the last few weeks in September, and so did the Phillies. I don't think there's any coincidence in that. But I mean, it's kind of a shame if he is not the guy that's going to be your ace on the times where you absolutely need to win. I mean, the fact that the fact that he pitched as he did on Sunday, what could be arguably his most important start yet, the start that would either make the Phillies into the playoffs or not, and they would have made the playoffs if he won. He came smaller than he did at any other point in the season. I think that is a little bit of a worry, and hopefully that's something that his talent can eventually overcome. But if he's not your ace, and yeah, Wheeler was good enough. I mean, I really think the Phillies set the rotation up the way they did there, so that Wheeler ideally would pitch the last game to get them into the playoffs, and Nola could start the playoffs. But the fact that they had to go to Hector Neris in the fourth inning and then Zach Eflin, I mean, that's a real indictment on Aaron Nola when it mattered most.
Yeah. How do you – man, this is a tough question. I know that you might not have the answers to this one, but I'm going to give it to you anyway because you are around this team so much. I know you know their minor league system way better than almost anybody I've ever talked to. But how do they fix this bullpen? Do they have guys in the organization that they just deemed not ready? Do they look at it and say, look, some of these guys have had a track record. They just didn't have a good year. I like what Brogdon brought to the table. I thought he had some much better his second time up. But overall, is there somebody or there a couple people in this organization, or is this a total outside of the organization rebuild and maybe some minor trades where you're just, hey, you take Hoskins, we'll take your overpriced arm?
Yeah, this is a really hard one to do because I agree with you. Connor Brogdon has the makings of a potential bullpen piece. I think Jojo Romero has the makings of a potential bullpen piece. But the problem is there's the best situation for guys like that to sort of come up and emerge is when you have other reliable pieces in place too. The fact that you have to go to Connor Brogdon to some very key situations in the last few games of the season while you're desperately trying to make the playoffs, and all your veteran relievers you traded for, or you're afraid to use them. I mean, it's not the best situation to be in.
Before you finish answering this question, because I want you to go back to this question, because again, Frank, you know more about this minor league system than almost anybody I've talked to when it comes to the depths of some of the guys. But what is your take on why these guys came here and struggled so much? I mean, Workman was an abomination. The guy was 10-1 with a 1.93 ERA. The year before, he was 6-1 with an ERA that was respectable in the threes. Phelps was a very reliable guy. Hembry was okay. He was horrible here. Like, what is your hypothesis as to why these guys have been serviceable elsewhere and just wretchedly bad when they get here?
The best explanation that I could come with is not anything that we can trace to mechanics or
philosophy.
I don't even think it's that. I mean, I think it's just that there was a culture built in the beginning of the season when things were going bad every single night that people came to the ballpark expecting to fail, and who knows? Maybe it rubbed off on them. I thought simply the fact they acquired Workman and Hembry at the same time, and then they even got one more arm beyond that, and they even overpaid for David Hale because Hale was better than Trevor Kelly and Dale Esquera. Like it seems like that the tide was going to turn, but then I think what we start to see is a couple guys just had their bad day, and then it got in their head, and then it just stuck there, like that they were expecting to fail. I don't know how you do it. I don't know where you find it, but you got to find at least one lockdown reliever. I mean, maybe you take a chance on, Trevor Rosenthal being what he was this year and not the year before, but that's going to cost you some big money. I mean, it's so hard to find the lockdown reliever that you can trust. And ideally, you have a couple veterans that really anchor the bullpen that you trust, and then you have some time for these young guys to come in, and you let these veteran lockdown arms that have an even better track record in the Brandon Workmans of the world. Let them set the tone for the bullpen. I mean, they gotta find somebody who's not just going to be a relief ace, but be the relief leader out there in the bullpen and really set the tone for the other guys. And it's a real shame that after all of that, they sent it Tommy. I mean, Tommy Hunter got the last save.
So let's go back to the depth of the organization. Are there guys that are young? You mentioned Brogdon. I would imagine he has a spot. Romero, okay, another guy. Are there guys that are, unfortunately didn't get a chance to pitch at Double-A this year or Single-A this year because of, the COVID situation? But are there some young, talented arms in the organization that are maybe, only 20 or 21 and the Phillies just didn't think they were ready?
Well, I like Damon Jones. I thought he might have made the alternate slate at some point, but and then maybe come from there. Damon Jones is a lefty, but here's part of the problem too is we didn't see these guys, so we don't know. I mean, Rafael Marchand, they grabbed him out of Class A and just held their breath. It was too hard to bring guys up like that. Usually Double-A, you get a really good sense of where the guys are at, and the ones that excelled in Clearwater last year, you didn't get to see where they went. So in a way, it's like a total crapshoot to try to figure out where the development of these guys are. I mean, even the ones that are at the alternate slate, you really can't tell who they are. So I wish I had a stronger answer, but there could be some names that I thought kind of looked nice last year. Now I didn't get to. I don't think I. I'm trying to remember. I don't think I was actually in Clearwater to see that team play last year. But in terms of Double-A and Triple-A last year, I think you got some guys that like Damon Jones that could help you down the line, and then the rest of them are the guys that you might see if there's a few injuries. You know what I mean? There's no real standout of last year's Double-A and last year's Triple-A, and it's almost like the ones that were in Class A in Clearwater the previous year. You don't know what you have yet, so it's a really tricky time. I think they need to find a lockdown arm that's not only a leader on the mound, but a leader in the bullpen. I don't know who that is or how they find it, but they got to do something dramatic.
Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. Phillies, very important offseason. Real Muto would probably be number one on the list. Didi Gregorius is way up on that list, fixing that entire bullpen, finding some starting pitching, possibly making a deal with Rhys Hoskins. They also have to figure out, in my opinion, Frank, what to do in center field. I don't think they think Hazley's an everyday player. They don't hit him against lefties. You can't count on Quinn. I don't know. They got a lot of decisions to make, and it looks like Matt Klentak could be the one making those decisions. I'll ask you that as we leave here. Will Matt Klentak be back?
I think no. I think John Middleton is going to take his usual time to do all his research and ask around, and I think that when it's all said and done, I think he's going to conclude that he has to go in those directions. That's just my personal hunch.
Yep. All right, Frank Klose, everybody. We'll certainly be keeping an eye on the Phillies offseason. Let me ask you this. There was the Phillies spring training schedule out. Do you anticipate, it sounds like they plan on playing not only spring training games, but having a full regular spring training. Do you think the baseball season gets off the ground, fans in the stands, as normal next year?
We will see. I actually plan to buy my airline tickets to be there for the first games of spring training. I'm going to hold my breath, though, and I'm going to buy the flight while it's cheap. I'm going to hold my breath.
I still have my credit from last year that I didn't use. I wonder if they'll let me use it. I don't know what I've ever even done with that thing. I just know I canceled the flight, but I don't know if I had to use it or what. But I
got credit from a couple series that I didn't use the flight. So I've got all this money, so I'm going to try to book this flight now to be there in February 27th when they start the spring training games.
I hope you're there. I hope I'm there as well. He's Frank Klose. We'll be with him all off season long. Of course, with what's going on with the Phillies, always check out 97.3 ESPN.com. And Frank Klose on Twitter, at Frank Klose with a K. And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Frank, take care, pal.
Good to talk to you, Mike.
Great conversation.